while the specifics surrounding the ordeal of children taken from their families, forcibly baptized, and subsequently sent to the Portuguese colony of Sao Tome in 1493 remain largely elusive beyond the initial event in Lisbon, certain aspects are consistently acknowledged by historians. The abduction and coerced conversion of these children are widely accepted facts. However, debates persist over the exact number of children involved and their ages. The more pressing matter, their experiences during the journey to Africa, their survival rate upon arriving, and their subsequent lives in the tropical climate, remains contentious and varies among scholars. Over the last 2 years, new insights have emerged thanks to the collaborative efforts with Dr. Moshe Liba, former Israeli ambassador to Sao Tome e Principe, in preparing an anthology of documents and essays. These new findings begin to shed light on the history of these children and their descendants, although the interpretation of how their suffering affected successive generations remains speculative. By examining archival records, including chronicles, ecclesiastical and administrative reports, and wills, we begin to understand the long-term impacts of their traumatic experiences. The majority of these 2,000 children, primarily aged between 2 and 12, endured significant trauma from being separated from their families. It has also been clarified that these children were from Jewish families of Castile, expelled by the Catholic monarchs in 1492, and were part of the Sephardic community that had resisted conversion for over a century. Unable to afford the mandatory transit tax imposed by the Portuguese, these families were declared slaves of the crown, further complicating the lives of these children as they grew up under conditions of anxiety, fear, and disorientation. The events surrounding their removal were of such brutality that some parents resorted to killing their children or themselves to spare further suffering. While some scholars debate the figures, claiming logistical impossibilities with the transport ships, the estimated survival of roughly 600 children from the initial 2,000 suggests severe harshness during the voyage, cramped, unhealthy conditions that exacerbated their trauma. Documents reviewed by Dr. Liba and myself confirm that these children were indeed enslaved as a result of their families' inability to pay the transit taxes, further exploited in Sao Tome under the guise of serving the colony's burgeoning sugar industry. About 25 years later, some were formally manumitted in the wills of Sao Tome's governors, illustrating the complex interplay between economic exploitation and the indignity experienced by these young individuals. The rationale behind their slavery encompasses more than economic exploitation. It also reflects a brutal manifestation of repressed rage and frustration, an outlet for violent impulses, as historically slaves in a household might bear the brunt of their master's anger or lewd desires, sparing family members but perpetuating cycles of abuse and degradation. The behavior and attitudes of these children as they grew up, and later their descendants, hint at deeply internalized fears and anger, likely passed down through generations. The interaction with African slaves in Sao Tome produced a mestizo community known for its defiance and harshness, shaping the colony's reputation as a tumultuous and harsh place for further generations of slaves. While concrete documentary evidence is scarce, and physical evidence such as exhumations remains unexplored, the behavioral patterns observed offer indirect insights into the profound impacts of their initial traumas. This mestizo elite eventually moved away from Sao Tome at the end of the 16th century, coinciding with the development of the sugar industry in Brazil, a migration influenced by both economic opportunities and the inhospitable conditions back in Sao Tome. In conclusion, the past traumas of these children, though perhaps lost to conscious recollection, appear to resurface in the behaviors and social dynamics observed in subsequent generations, particularly evident in their descendants' actions in Brazil. This hypothesis, while speculative, invites further study into the long-term effects of such historical traumas. Though successful in the sugar industry under colonial rule by the Portuguese, When the Dutch conquered the northeast quadrant near Recife and set up its short-lived Protestant regime, many new Christians in the area, and perhaps from further afield, took the opportunity to leave the jurisdiction of the Portuguese crown and the Inquisition to return to Judaism and join the small and growing Jewish community that was fostered by the Amsterdam synagogues. At the same time, in a paradoxical action that again alerts us to possible explanations in the bizarre behaviors of the children of trauma victims, the migrants from Sao Tome, black slaves and mestizos included, were active in the guerrilla war against Dutch rule and the call for the return of the Catholic Church and its Holy Office. It will be difficult to prove either the historical connections and even more so the possible psycho-historical dimension to the events in the mid-17th century in this area of the world. Yet again, I believe there is a case to be answered. In other words, the questions raised are worthy of further research.